Kennedy Stewart is running for mayor of Vancouver as an independent candidate. He moved to Vancouver from Nova Scotia in 1989. He's worked for the city, has studied and taught at SFU, and has a PhD on world cities from the London School of Economics in the UK. He was elected as an NDP Member of Parliament in Burnaby in 2011. He has since resigned now that he's running for Vancouver, and he joins us in studio today. Thanks for coming in.
Thank you very much for having me.
Tell us why you're making this leap from federal now to municipal politics.
Right. Well, when Greg Robertson announced he wasn't running for mayor, a number of people approached me to maybe consider it. And I just love cities. Like I sometimes I feel misplaced as a federal politician because I love cities so much, and in particular Vancouver, since it's really given me everything. And so, I talked to my wife, Jeanette, and I said, what do you think? Some polling came out that had me, in the top 5, but then the pollster said, well, probably the top 4 aren't going to run. So it looks like you might have a decent shot. And so I learned all that on May 1st, and on May 10th, I jumped in.
I think number one issue for most candidates, and I think for most people in Vancouver, it's got to be the housing affordability issue. You're proposing bumping it up quite a bit with regards to, say, rental stock that's available here. Make the case for the business model. How is it going to work just day to day? How do you make this happen here?
Well, a lot of my work as an academic has been on cities and housing, and I've also done it practically as a housing policy advisor all around the world. And what I notice in the most successful cities is that they provide housing, not provide, but they facilitate housing for people who are working there. And how they do it usually is through nonprofits operating regular rental housing that you can't really distinguish from market rental, but the revenue comes, usually it's built on government property, usually city property. The nonprofit runs it, charges slightly less than market rents, and the buildings are still making revenue. And then that revenue is put back into the housing for the social housing you see on the downtown east side. So places like Copenhagen have perfected this model, and I know we can move it here. We just have to make it happen.
We have, as you would know, a number of official community plans. Do you envision keeping those, changing them, especially when we're talking about maybe densifying slightly? What do you think the future holds for those?
Right. Well, plans are always evolving. If you think of Vancouver formed in 1886, so what it looks like, City Hall was in a tent. So, it has evolved a lot and will continue to evolve. So those are living plans. The first thing I worked on in the city was City Plan in 1993. That's what I was brought in to help facilitate public input into that. So I think like my priority right now is talking to business, talking to the folks working in the city. Is we need some affordable housing right now, and so that's like a triage essentially. But I do see us going forward with a new strategy for the city to think, well, where are we going to be in 25 years, and to make sure that we're talking to everyone. And business is a huge component of that, because businesses are so forward looking that their business owners and managers are looking at what's coming, and then what the city needs to adjust to keep up with the rest of the world, because it's a global economy and it can go bad pretty fast. So we always have to be talking and continually revising our plans.
So from a city planning perspective, you got your start as an assistant planner here in City of Vancouver. What would be one of the first things that you would change, though? What would you come in on day number one? What would you prioritize about, like, this is how we should be rethinking things when it comes to the city from a planning perspective?
Yeah, I think so. It'll probably be a fractured council, and I think
that's very likely. Yeah.
Yeah. So the first thing is to make sure we're pulling everybody together, not to think, not to just say my way or the highway. And that's in Ottawa. There's this kind of joke saying I'm the most popular MP in all parties but my own, because I would always reach across the aisle and I got stuff accomplished. So I got legislation passed, and I got things in the budget, and because I would work with other people, and that's what I'll do. So the first thing is to make sure that we're all working together as a team, whoever gets elected, to make the city work. And I do have the experience to do that. And then we have to get right to work on this affordable housing issue. So it is, there's a couple of things, but it's really, you can't promise that you're going to solve it overnight because, a building takes about 5 to 6 years from start to finish, once you get all the capital together and all that. So,
so you're counting on a second term then to see this?
No, I'm not. I think once you get this structure set up, then it will roll through. And I don't think any sane future council would really change the model because it works so well elsewhere. Sure. But it's actually working with staff to make sure we shift the priority to that. The other thing is, I do know the one thing we can do immediately is the empty homes tax. There's been a lot of talk about this kind of speculative buying up of units and leaving them empty in the city. It's been in for a little while now, and we're seeing evidence that it's working. And so policies that work, you should reinforce. And when they're finished working, you should pull them out. So that's really the plan for that. And we could do that right away. We can't really control what the federal provincial government does, but we can certainly control things within jurisdiction. So that's something we could do right away to make sure that we're filling those empty units, empty homes as fast as we can.
What other measures would you propose around reducing speculation? That's one of your platform pieces on housing.
Yeah, I mean, so you saw in New Zealand where they just banned 100% of foreign ownership. That takes the national government to do that, really, or maybe the province could do it, but so we have to focus on what can the city do, and that's really what's in my platform. So going forward with all new housing that's built, I figure we can protect up to one half of that, and that is through this rental specific zoning that's just been granted to the city through the province, and through building nonprofit run housing because speculators don't usually touch that. So over the 10 years, and I don't want to give you exact figures, so that's why I've given you a range because it's hard to know. But between 1/3 and a half of all new housing would be protected from foreign speculation. And if we want to go further, then the feds. Mainly the feds would have to do that.
What would be the strategy for attracting and retaining companies here in Vancouver? Because it's one thing to say, yeah, we're addressing the housing affordability issue, stick around 5-6 years and we'll have it resolved. What about right now? What's the value proposition for companies coming to Vancouver?
Yeah, I've had some very disturbing conversations with large tech firms who are extremely mobile. They're leasing their buildings now and they can pull out. And especially when their workforce is also mobile or they have multiple sites that the employees can go to. So their number one thing is having the affordable housing. That's why these kind of super high skilled workers perhaps would bypass Vancouver and go somewhere else. So one of it's to make sure we're building in housing with like large developments. So I'll give you a great example. The St. Paul's Hospital is going to be down in Main and Terminal, and that is, you don't think of it as like an industry, but it actually is. Large research hospitals generate a lot, and not just within the hospital, with all the accompanying businesses that support the work that are done there. But our current plan for the St. Paul's Hospital has no housing attached or minuscule amount. So I think, I have been, I talked with the board, and I've actually Jim Pattison is one of the main investors. He's very, very generous in giving up $75 million. And I've talked with Mr. Pattison and others about the possibility of adding a housing component to St. Paul's, and thinking that we shouldn't have major development in the city, like a large campus like that, without having accompanying housing. And I do think that's the kind of conversations we can have with tech firms as well, or other firms that want to come into the city, is to look at a comprehensive plan for their how they live and work in the city.
And we know at the other end, small businesses facing these challenges as well often can't afford the spaces they're in, can't find a space, and are moving further and further out of the city core. What solutions would you maybe have for small mom and pop shops who maybe can't wait, say, a year until new housing comes available, and that would maybe trickle down and affect their business?
Yeah, we have so I've been meeting with all the business improvement associations, and they're very neat organizations because they represent both companies that are leasing and companies that are owning. And it seems to me that the local owned buildings which house business are pretty reasonable when they deal with clients. But now that we've kind of pushed some of the foreign investment out of residential homes, it seems to be going into commercial properties. And then when you're an owner of a large building and you're living outside the country and you're just concerned about maximizing your profit, you will often increase your commercial rents. And that's having a big impact on some of the local businesses for sure. So I think that's something we have to look at right away. I have as well as commercial property taxes too. I do think that talking with the BIAs, they would like to explore perhaps a different approach to that, and I'm very open to that. I'm a policy prof before I was an MP, and I think all options should be on the table. You evaluate them fairly, and you think with scientific evidence, the best evidence you have, and that's how you make policy. So I can understand the pain. Just talking to many small business owners of them losing a business that they've had. My wife was actually talking to the folks at Chocolate Mousse downtown. That's been well publicized. Who we used to shop there, we continue to shop there, but they're going to, a long-term business that's an anchor in the community that gets forced out is that will happen occasionally, like it does in all cities. But when it's happening on a large scale, then you've got a problem you've got to correct.
Future of a Trans Mountain pipeline expansion seems to be very much up in the air at this point. But what would your role be if you're mayor of Vancouver with regards to, the future of such an expansion? Because this is very much a provincial, federal issue here. There's limited amounts that really the city level can do. Mm-hmm. What do you envision your role being here?
Yeah, I mean, my opposition to the pipeline is quite well known. And the reason I did it, though, was for my constituents. So, back in 2011, when I was elected in North Burnaby, my constituents decided they didn't want this. So I fought like hell for them. I really did. And I have done for 7 years. It wasn't really driven by me. It was driven by my community. So yes, I still oppose the Kinder Morgan pipeline, and I would continue to do what the city does now, is to intervene in court cases. I think that's a good use, and it is a very bad project for the city as far as I'm concerned. But I think my actions there also demonstrate how much I dig in for the people I represent, and that is. And I think that's a good trait in a mayor, and I hope other people do too. But you need a mayor that's going to fight for the city and not just talk about doing it. I have demonstrated that is, I'll go all the way if I have to get something for the people I represent.
What about the fear from some of the business community that if you have a mayor like that, it could signal Vancouver's kind of closed to business to a certain degree?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's such a specific project. It doesn't show that. I think that, in Ottawa, even though my opposition, I stand up in the House of Commons and make my anti-Kinder Morgan speech and I get booed and people say throw him in jail and stuff. But then I walk in the lobbies and I talk to people fine. I can talk to ministers. It's because I have that experience. It's not a personal attack. It's something about policy. And I think that's always how I've conducted myself. So even though I may be on the other side of an issue with other elected representatives, whoever, I can compartmentalize that and immediately go have a beer with them or something and work through other issues. So I mean, and that's really what my experience has taught me is don't hold grudges and do not make personal attacks, because you may have to work with somebody the next day. And that's what I've learned from this. I have to say it's, my grandfather was an Anglican priest, and I always think, like, what would he say if he saw me standing here on passing an injunction line? And so it's something I did not do lightly. I did it for my constituents, though.
This is shaping up to be an interesting election for a number of reasons. One, regionally, is that we're seeing this kind of changing of the guard, with more than half of municipality mayors choosing not to seek re-election. What do you think, if elected, you'd bring to sort of the regional bodies that tackle issues? So Mayor's Council, Metro Vancouver Board, given your experience at the federal level, what do you contribute there?
I think it's more the same. It is bringing people together. And that's what I've done at the federal level. Last year I I wrote a book with Michael Chong and Elizabeth May about how to make Parliament better. So, that's something that's been kind of the hallmark of my career is that, and I do think it's all constant negotiation. City council is constant negotiation, regional is constant negotiation, as is provincial and federal. And I think so I'm experienced in that area, and I think, as the mayor of Vancouver does play an important role in Metro. And I think, I'll tell you a story. When I was elected with Jack Layton in 2011, it was the first time the NDP was the official opposition. There were 103 of us in the House of Commons. And Jack told us, no heckling. So we went into the House of Commons and none of us heckled. And the other sides were, Liberals and Conservatives were heckling away. And then Stephen Harper walked across and talked to Jack Layton and said, we're not going to heckle either. And then for a month, because Jack was only there for a month, there was no heckling. And it shows what leadership can do to change the how you negotiate and how you talk to people. And so, sometimes I go back and watch that footage when the House of Commons was quiet and actually you were debating we were debating extending the mission in Libya, which is a pretty heavy topic, right? You're basically, sending bombers over there, jet fighters and stuff. And so it really did help the discussion not to be yelling at each other. And I do think, you're inspired by that kind of leadership, and that hopefully those lessons I could bring to Metro Council and try to get everybody to work along a little better.
Talk to people out there. They look at traffic right now, and I don't think any of them think it's necessarily getting even better. How do you want to tackle the congestion issues that are plaguing many parts of the city?
Yeah. So again, like the big infrastructure transit projects like the Broadway, SkyTrain extension, they depend on provincial and federal funding. So your job as mayor is to go off and get that funding and make the case and use every trick in the book to try to get them invest here rather than in Ontario or Quebec, because that's really the competition. But then it's to concentrate on what you can do. And so really it's not very glamorous, but my plan is to bring in more kind of local community buses. So especially for seniors and people that are transit dependent, this really gets people out of their cars and lets them better access their local community. So you go out of your door, you get the little local bus, you go to the library and the community center and the doctor and the bank and the grocery store, and that can all be done on your little local bus. And once they get to 80% capacity, they pay for themselves. So this is something the city can do directly, and it does get people out of cars, and then it reduces traffic congestion locally. The problem is, it's a good thing, is that we're the core of the region, and you're going to have lots of people driving into the city. So the best thing we can do is also help to increase regional transit options for folks, and that should reduce it. But most city issues are about managing problems rather than solving them, and also measuring as you're going along to make sure things are getting better rather than worse, and being transparent about that. So I do think that's something that I would immediately do at the city too, is say, here's the baseline that we started from, this is where our goal is, these are the policies we're going to use to try to get there, and then report, is this working or not? And if it's not working, try something different.
We, of course, have the legalization of recreational cannabis coming up in just a couple of weeks now. We've been talking about it for so long. How would you handle the illegal dispensaries that are well known in Vancouver and have been here for quite some time?
Well, I am really proud of, I did get a piece of legislation passed that amends the criminal code when it comes to impaired driving, which will affect the use of cannabis. So that's something I worked with a constituent on that who'd lost a sister in an impaired driving accident. So that is another example of how does a guy in opposition get stuff passed in the House of Commons? Well, you make a good case, and it was incorporated in the law that was passed in June. With the local dispensaries, I am, I enjoy craft beer as much as the next person, and I do think there's lots of room for craft cannabis, ways of dispensing that, and also developing products and that type of thing. So I think that's what the city, we have limited powers in this area, but I do think it's important to have a mix and not just have one giant company owning everything. I do think that innovation often comes from the smaller outfits, and that would be great. And especially if at some point we can, make this an industry that we're already very good at. Everybody knows that. I think the Fraser Institute said BC is like has a $7 billion a year cannabis industry now, but now that it's going to be legalized, that's something we can lead in, as long as it fits well with the city, as long as it kind of I don't know, it synchronizes with what we're doing now. So you're not, it's not wrecking your day-to-day life. So that's really the balance we have to strike. But I do think it's a big opportunity for us to move, and we should move ahead with it.
Oh, Kennedy, we appreciate you coming in. Thanks for your time and best of luck on the campaign trail.
Well, thank you very much. I really enjoyed it, and thanks for the work you do.
That's Kennedy Stewart, Vancouver mayoral candidate running as an independent. And that's it for our show. Thanks for listening to BIV Today.
You can find us on iTunes or go to Stitcher or just go to BIV.com to find the rest of our business stories up online.